The novel Les Miserables takes place in France, mainly in Paris, in a period of about 20 years, from the end of the Napoleonic Empire, when Shen Bachen was released from prison in 1815, until the first years of Louis Philippe's monarchy in 1832. Through the memories of the characters, the author goes back even further in time, until the end of the 18th century. The first part of the novel takes place in various French towns in the provinces. In the rest of the novel, the action focuses on Paris and its surroundings. Montfermeil, where the Thénardiers had their inn, or Vernon, where Marius dies. Paris was at the time the second most populous city in Europe after London, and the European continent played an important role. Through the narration, the author takes us through different areas of Paris: streets, squares, bridges, taverns, churches, the Cernaqui, the market, and the Luxembourg Gardens. The novel covers 2 decades and allows Victor Hugo to make a historical journey of that period, beginning with the fall of the Napoleonic Empire, naming the Battle of Waterloo, followed by Bourbon restoration. The Revolution of July 1830 ended the Bourbons and Absolutism, placing Louis Philippe of Orleans, the bourgeois king, on the throne. This was not an improvement for the pure social sectors. It caused that in the midst of economic difficulties and the cholera epidemic, a new attempt at revolution took place at the end of 1832, but it was repressed by the army, as reflected in the final section of the novel.
The Battle of Waterloo took place on June the 18th, 1815. It was commanded by Napoleon I, the Emperor of France. Napoleon Bonaparte was a short militiaman known for his outstanding strategic performance. He joined the popular forces of the French Revolution and progressively made his way to ultimate power, but lost it all due to his ambitious decisions. Actually, he was fundamental to our independence because when he invaded Spain in his expansion campaigns, people from Buenos Aires, Argentina, took this as a chance to revolt. It took 7 European coalitions to stop Napoleon's plans for domination, but they finally defeated him in Waterloo. The Victor Hugo's novels, Les Miserables, show us many of the social differences that the characters had been through. The first one, the main character Jean Valjean, is the example of how the justice system mistreats criminals. Valjean is arrested for stealing one loaf of bread to feed his family. He is imprisoned for that, and when he had just been released from prison, he was forced to survive in the street, judged by the social prejudice. Another important view is Fantine, a single mother. She was an example of the unfair treatments to women of the lower classes. She had been fired from the factory job when it is discovered that she has a child she is caring for, and not being married is not well seen. Because of this, she turned to prostitution and she is then arrested for earning money in such a desperate way. Evening also grew up surrounded by misery, living in the poverty and being cruelly treated by his parents. On the other hand, Marius, a young boy from a lower class family, desperate from rebellion and a desire for change, gets into the barricade in protest against the King Louis Philippe and his government. When Marius met Cosette, he shows the existence of a romantic soul. He represents the romantic ideas of Victor Hugo in the early 19th century. Writers and artists believe in the importance of individual feelings and the power of freedom. That's why Marius left his grandfather's home, ignoring his privileged life. To conclude, society has the power to completely wreck somebody, not only their body, but their soul too. The struggle between the upper and the lower classes is not only in that period. This place gives the insight of despair, blame, guilty, revenge, and mercy. That was alive before and after the Battle of Waterloo.
Why is the novel called Les Miserables? The novel is called Les Miserables because what most reflects and attracts attention throughout the book is the misery in which its characters find themselves. Besides, Victor Hugo describes and criticizes the social injustice in France between the defeat of Napoleon at the Battle of Waterloo and the failed revolution against King Louis Philippe. Les Miserables is a French phrase that doesn't have an exact translation into English, but has two meanings: a person who lives in misery and a person who lives apart from society in total poverty. He writes in his own introduction to the book: the laws and customs of France create a social condition that is a kind of social hell. As long as there is unconsciousness and poverty on earth, books like this will always be necessary.
How do you feel when we read about Fontaine's short and terrible life? I felt upset. It was really hard to read about Fontaine's life, especially knowing that her life was very common in France at that time. She lived in a difficult period and life put her in hard situations more often than anyone deserves. But she had to make choices and she decided for her daughter. She did a lot more for Cosette than most women would have done in her place. For instance, she could easily pretend that she didn't have a daughter and start a new life and nobody would have ever known. But she was strong and loved Cosette more than anything. I think it is very sad to know that after everything she did, she could not see Cosette one last time. She deserved a little peace after all the pain that she went through. But sadly, life does not have happy endings, and this story presents life in a real way, too good for some people and full of pain and suffering for others. It was sad to read this part, but it was a relief to know that after she died, her daughter was rescued and raised with love and happiness, just as she always wanted.